Who does not like a happy ending? That is why even as children, we would read the stories of fairy tales to our kids, starting off with once upon a time and ending with, and they lived happily ever after. We love stories like that. We love stories that ends happily. But this story of the Shunammite woman on 2 Kings chapter 4 tells us that through that journey of life, even indeed we have a happy ending, there are a lot of things that will need to transpire before we achieve that happy ending. Pretty much like a fairy tale, as mentioned earlier, before the princess gets his Prince Charming, the prince still has to battle a lot of things before a happy ending will indeed happen. So today, if you have your Bibles with you, please turn to 2 Kings chapter 4. And if there's one thing that you will be able to take home and you'll be able to ponder upon during the week, it is this: faith prevails even when all else fails. When we ask a question, we should not ask, "May faith ka ba?" Because everyone has faith. The question is, where is your faith upon? A lot of times we put our faith or our hope on something that is reachable, that is something that we can see, something that is attainable. But when all of those fails, our faith in the one true God, the one who reigns, should always prevail. So during a time when YMCA or the YWCA or all the hostels or all the hotels were not yet opened, there was one woman who opened her home to a prophet. During this time, the prophets were migrants. So they would be moving about. They would be going from town to town, delivering the word of God. And so was true with Elisha. And one day, in 2 Kings chapter 4, starting with verse 8, Elisha went to a town that was called Shunem. So the place Shunem was one of the areas wherein the tribe of Issachar stayed. So the people there were called Shunamites. We don't know if at this point in time, the Shunamites were all already God believers, because of old they weren't. In the town of Shunem, as Elisha was passing by, there was a wealthy woman. And when we say she's a wealthy woman, it just doesn't mean that she was rich. The word used here for wealthy means she was prominent, she was popular, she was noted in town. So there was a wealthy woman who urged Elisha. I like that word. She urged. Ibig sabihin, medyo pinilit niya si Elisha. Siguro, as the woman was looking out her window and expecting, looking at the people watching, she would always say, "See, this man walking about. Hey, there's that man again walking." And during that time, as I said, the prophets, wala naman silang baon. So wherever they stayed, that's where they would sleep, that's where they would bathe. They would knock on doors and ask for kind hearts to be able to accept them, to be able to eat or drink. So this woman was very kind. She opened her home for Elisha to eat. "Sir, I have tapa. Halika, kain ka. I have tapsilog." So that happened a number of times. She would invite Elisha into her home and to be able to dine with them. And we all know for a fact that once you invite someone to eat with you, that's tantamount to establishing a deeper, longer, more established relationship with them. Right? So there's now a relationship that was being established between Elisha and the Shunammite woman. So time and time again, siguro nasarapan si Elisha sa adobo or sa sinigang. So every time Elisha would be passing by, he would see to it that he would pass by the Shunammite woman's house. After that, one time, siguro she was going home from her amigas, maybe she saw Elisha sleeping under the tree or resting his back against a rock. So she had an idea. She told her husband, "Honey, I am sure this man, that man Elisha, who stops by to have breakfast with us, or who loves my adobo, why don't we do this for him? He had a wonderful idea. He said, why don't we renovate our roof, our second level, and convert it into his room? This holy man of God, I want to build a room for him. I don't know how the woman was able to identify him to be holy, but I am sure that there was something different about Elisha. So they renovated the room, they renovated her house, and after the renovating, calls her husband and says, honey, let's go to Picket and Rail. Or Rich diba? Or Furniture Mall. Or IKEA. Let's get him a bed. Let's get him a table. Let's get him a chair. And let's get him a lamp. Then, he will have a place to stay whenever he comes by. So one evening, as Elisha was resting, lying on his king-size bed, he remembers the woman and tells his assistant, Gehazi. He goes, tell the woman of Shunem, I want to speak to her. Why? Because he wanted to repay the woman something. When the Shunammite woman appeared before her, she said, through Gehazi. So maybe Elisha was not fluent in the dialect of the Shunamites. So he needed an interpreter through Gehazi. So Elisha would send the message to Gehazi, and Gehazi was the one who was speaking directly to the Shunammite woman. So Elisha said, tell her, we appreciate her kindness. We appreciate that she renovated her home for me. We appreciate that she gave me a nice bed. Please ask her, what can we do for you? Elisha wanted to bless her. So he goes, do you need a good word with the king? I know the king. Elisha goes. He starts off with saying, I know the king. Do you need a new mayor's permit for the new business? I can help you facilitate that. He goes asking her, what? What is it that you want? How can I help you? Elisha was rattling off everything that he could possibly do for this woman. But look how contented the woman is. He goes, no. She replied, my family takes good care of me. She was so content, she was so satisfied with where she was, that she says, I don't need anything. You don't need to give me any favors. Diba? When we have access to our political figures, that's what we do. We ask them for favors. But this woman never asked for anything. She said, no, my family takes good care of me. So later on again, Elisha was really worried. Gehazi, what can we do for her? I really want to repay her. She's just so good. She's just so kind. So obviously here, Gehazi was more observant than Elisha. Because Gehazi goes and tells her, the times that you were sleeping in the house, did you ever hear a baby cry? Or did you ever hear the pitter-patter footsteps of a small little kid? No, right? Because she doesn't have a son. And add to that, her husband is an old man. So what is Gehazi saying here? Gehazi is saying she is barren. And scientifically during that time, it is not anymore possible for her to have a child because the husband is already old. So that means during that time, barrenness is such a curse. Why? Because if you're barren, if you cannot bear children, that means that is the end of your lifeline. Your family will no longer thrive. That's the end of the story of your family. That is why having a child, kahit isa lang, was such a blessing for them. So Gehazi was saying she doesn't have a son and it is already impossible for her to have a child. At this point in time, her husband can no longer do it because he is an old man. So Elisha had an idea. And he goes, call her back. Gehazi, call the Shunammite woman. So the Shunammite woman comes, standing by the door of Elisha. And this is what the Elisha tells her. Next year, at this time, you will be holding a son in your arms. Not just a child. It was very specific that it was going to be a son. Why? Because a son will be the one carrying the name of the family. And therefore, their family will now thrive all the more. And seasons after seasons, their family, the Shunammite woman's family, will now be known. And this is what is surprising. You would imagine that not having a child and being professed to, being given a hope that, hey, you can now have a child. Magtatatalon ka na siguro, di ba? You will be jumping for joy, elated at this news. But look at the Shunammite woman's response. No, my Lord, she cried. Oh, man of God, do not deceive me. Short of accusing Elisha, binanggit pa niya that he was a man of God. And yet, she was accusing the man of God, the prophet, the messenger of God, to be deceiving her. Wag mo na akong lokohin. Ikaw naman, niloloko mo pa ako. She was accusing Elisha of lying to her. And get my hopes up like that. It seemed like that the Shunammite woman has already established in her mind, hindi na ako magkakaanak. She has accepted, maybe for years she has been praying and waiting, excited to have a child. But at this point in time, she knew that her husband was not capable anymore of helping her bear one, and much more her, because all through this time, she didn't have a child. She was already accepting of her situation. So what happened next? You know what the problem with the Shunammite woman was? She was already content with her present condition. She was already happy. Okay na po ako. I can have tea with my amigas when I'm free. Diba? I can go watch a movie when I want. I can ride my Pajero and go Orchard Road and go shopping. We have our fields. We have our business. I have a loving husband. She was contented with what she had. She was already happy with her life now. And you know, that's the problem with us. That's the problem when we are in our comfort zones. We become very comfortable that we tend to accept the mediocre. We already accept the median, what is just acceptable. We begin to be scared to expect for the best. Because, okay na ako, I'm okay, I'm just drifting here. Waking up every day, my boss loves me, I have a decent salary, I have a house, I'm amortizing a new mansion in the Philippines, I have 2 cars there, I'm okay, I'm content. We content ourselves with the mediocre because we are scared to expect for the best. Do you know that when we are in our comfort zones, we limit God with what we hope for? But God said that He can give us immeasurably far more than what we can even expect or even imagine. That's how huge God can give us. We limit our faith with the simple desires of what we have, of the simple desires that we want. What happened next? Sure enough, the woman conceived and had a son. As Elisha prophesied, the following year, the same time the following year, she had a son. Okay, Sister Barry, end of story, happy ending na eh. Diba? End of story, everybody happy. She had her son, they're wealthy, they're well provided for, pero hindi po. Mataas ang rating ng teleserye, kaya tuloy ang storya. So the story continues. One day, when the son was older, maybe 7, 8, 9, not very big yet, he went out with his father. I am sure that dad was very proud. He would be raving about this son of his, that he now has a son. He now has an heir to all the riches that he has. Alam nyo, our children, even when they were young, so they would be tugging and asking, I want to come, Papa, I want to come. Papa, where are you going? I want to go with you. I want to go with you. And that was what was happening to this child. Daddy, where are you going? Oh, I'm going to the fields. Can I go? Can I go? Can I go? Siguro one time, sa kakukulit, he decided to bring him. And it was harvest season. Everybody was so busy, but everybody was touting over him. So eto, sabi siguro ng mga tao sa field, apo po nyo, hindi, old na siya, di ba? Hindi, anak ko. Di ba? With all pride, beaming with pride, he would say, that's my son. But what happened next? Suddenly, in the field, at the heat of the sun, the child cries and said, head pain, ouch, daddy, I have a headache. So her father, seeing him, siguro there was nothing alarming with the way he looked. Because what he did was, he called his servants and said, uwi mo na nga siya. Take him home, bring him to mama. Maybe he misses mama, or maybe he's hungry, or maybe he's already thirsty. Sige, uwi mo na. Give him back to his mom. So, because if it was something alarming from the way it looked, I'm sure the father would have brought him home. But siguro, okay lang, baka akala niya nag-iinarte lang yung bata. So, the servant brings him home. And what happened next? So the servant took him home and the mother held him on his lap. But around noontime, tragedy strikes and the child dies. The child died. You can imagine. Go with me. Allow me to bring you to that room, holding on to your son, your precious son, one and only. You waited for him for such a long time. You did not even ask for him, but he was given to you. And here he was. You can see him until the time that he breathes his last. What would you do? I can imagine. You would be wailing and crying and screaming, "Anak, hindi!" Diba? "Anak, mabuhay ka!" But that wasn't what she did. She carried him, wrapped him in cloth, and laid him on the bed of the man of God. Inakyat niya dun sa second floor. The child was brought there, and he was laid on the bed of Elisha. Then she shut the door and left him there. Obviously, this woman was not preparing for burial. She did not text anyone or call anyone and tell them, "My child is dead." She did not post on FB and say, "Feeling depressed," or an emoticon that was crying and crying. Walang ganon. She kept it to herself. How can you, when your child is dead, how can you not go anywhere or run to anybody and express your grief and sorrow? Why? Because this time her faith was being stretched. She was not preparing for a burial of her son. She was not accepting the fact that her son was dead. This is the son promised to me, because she knew that when all else fails, my faith will prevail. So she continues. She sends a message to the husband and says, "Honey, can you please send one of the drivers and send the Pajero, because I'm going to visit the man of God." He was still recognizing Elisha to be the man of God. "Send him right away so that I can come back as soon as I can." Si husband, si hubby, texts back, "Honey, why are you going today? It's neither new moon or Sabbath." Obviously, this family was aware of the Jews' practices. She was aware of Sabbath. He was aware that there is a new moon festival wherein you are able to speak and converse with the prophets. So he goes, "Bakit ka pupunta ngayon? Hindi naman, wala naman special occasion." Parang iba, di ba, nagsisimba lang pag special occasion, pag birthday, o Pasko, or Easter, di ba? So that was what she was saying. Why go today? When it is not a holiday, it's not a feast. And look at the response of the Shunammite woman. But she said, "It will be all right." How can she say that when the very son that she wanted, the hope that she has held on to for so long, is dead? And here she was proclaiming, "Honey, don't worry, it will be all right." She still did not proclaim to the husband that their child is dead. She was not accepting the fact that the child was dead. It will be all right. That is the faith that she was holding on to. She was expectant that things will be all right, because faith prevails when all else fails. When everything else is gone to nothing, her faith was prevailing at this time. So she saddled the donkey and told the servant, "Hurry, don't go slow. Unless I tell you to, do not stop at anything." So she goes to Mount Carmel where Elisha was. And when she arrived at Mount Carmel, parating pa lang siya, nakita na siya ni Elisha. So she sent off Gehazi and tells him, "Go and welcome her and ask her. Ask about her husband. Ask about her child. Ask, kamustahin mo, how is she?" Ask her how she's doing. Because I am sure the Shunammite woman never visited Elisha. But Elisha would always be coming by. So for her to come and visit Elisha, there was something wrong. But then again, look at the response of the Shunammite woman. Earlier, what was the response? Everything will be all right. This time when Gehazi asked her, kamusta po? The Shunammite woman responds, everything is fine. From it will be fine, now she was sure. Seeing Elisha from afar, nakita na niya, this is the source of where my faith came from. He is the one who promised me and has given me. It is true that he has given me a child. His promise was he was giving me a child. But now that the child is dead, his promise is no longer true. But I am still holding on to that promise, because if the child is dead, then his promise will not be fulfilled. So she said, everything is fine. Parang tayo pag nangangamusta, kamusta po? Mabuti. Pero ang emoticon sa likod, umiiyak. Diba? Kaya minsan, us, every time we come and ask, how are you? If we can only stay a little longer and really so that you can bear your hearts to us. It's very few times when we say, kamusta po? And that person will start to cry. Minsan nakakatakot yun, bigla na lang umiyak. Kaya, our koinonia is very important because that is where you're able to converse, you're able to talk. Ang kamustahan mas may sense, ang kamustahan longer. It is there that you can bare your hearts and tell them what's really wrong. So the Shunammite woman responds, everything is fine. Such confidence and faith, everything is fine. But when she came to Elisha, she was coming near. Before she could even kneel down, Gehazi was pushing her away. The blocks that was being established for her to be able to fulfill her faith was just present there. But Elisha, in his kindness, said, no, there's something wrong. There's something troubling her. Let her come. She is deeply troubled, but the Lord is not telling me what it is. So obviously, si Elisha po hindi manghuhula. Para rin pong tayo, hindi po natin nahuhulaan ang puso ng mga tao. We do not completely understand. It is not being born to us until the Lord reveals it to him. That's the only time that he will know. Then, when the Shunammite woman comes to Elisha, she goes, did I ask for a son, my Lord? Didn't I tell you not to deceive me? Didn't I tell you not to get my hopes up? Did I not tell you during that time, but still you insisted to bless me with a son? That was what he was saying here. And then Elisha knew that there was something wrong with the son. That is why he summoned Gehazi and tells him, Gehazi, umuwi ka. Mauna ka na dun sa bahay nila. Get my staff. You know, because the staff, remember during Moses' time even, the staff was very important to them. It is like, there's some sort of power that is being given to the staff. And he tells Gehazi, go home, get my staff, and put that staff upon the face of the child. But the boy's mother, look at this transition. The boy's mother says, as surely as the Lord lives. Pansinin niyo po yung word na Lord. Earlier, he was referring to Elisha, my Lord. Why have you given me this child? In respect and reverence, he was calling Elisha my Lord. But this time, who was she referencing to now? It is now God. She has now moved her faith from Elisha being able to give me a son to it is not Elisha. Elisha was just a medium. It was just where the Lord passed through the message. But it is really God to whom I have faith. It is really God who has given me that son. So as surely as the Lord lives, you yourself live, I will not go home. I will not go home, Lord, until you come with me and join me and see my son for yourself. The Shunammite woman's faith has now stretched so much that he was now holding on to not Elisha. He was no longer looking at Elisha. He was now looking upon the Lord who has given her that faith, because faith prevails when all else fails. When you see that flat line and when you see that cadaver cold, you would have accepted, my son is dead. But this woman didn't. And as they were going, nagkasalubong po sila ni Elisha at Gehazi. And Gehazi said, sorry, sir, the child is still dead. But the woman goes, no, 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 Elisha, come on. I can imagine the woman tugging Elisha and pulling him. No, no, sir, we have to go, let's go home. And true enough, Elisha went with her. And upon going into the house, he sees that the child was in the bed that was bought for him. And standing by that door, seeing the child, siguro inside, iiling-iling na siyang ganon. But he could not show that to the woman because the woman was standing there firm and saying, no, my son will not die. He's not supposed to die. He is your promise to me. He is your blessing to me. So what did Elisha do? He prayed, maybe praying with every word that he knew of, with everything that he had. He prayed to the Lord. And after that, he laid upon the child. May mouth-to-mouth resuscitation niya, siguro pinump niya yung heart, eyes to eyes, palm to palm, as if he wanted to transfer his very life onto the child. And true enough, as he was doing that, the child became warm, but not warm enough for him to live. Because he said he began to grow warm, but the child was still dead. So Elisha got up. Siguro pagod na siya sa pagkakadapa. He got up and started to pace, walking back, Lord, this is not going to happen. Lord, this child has to live. Lord, honor the faith of the woman. Lord, look at her faith. I can imagine Elisha using every word, pacing back and forth, and then settling to himself and said, okay, Lord. Siguro yung faith ni Elisha, nasa stretch din at this time, because he then once more, he laid himself upon the child and doing the same thing. And lo and behold, this time, the boy sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes. That is how detailed and how true this story is. Because nabilang pa nila kung ilang beses sumatching yung bata. Pero ang tanong ko, bakit hindi man nila tinanong yung pangalan ng Shunammite woman? Nabilang nila 1, 2, 3, 7 sneezes. But nobody dared ask, ano nga pangalan mo? Diba? Napakadali naman sana tanongin. May I know your name, ma'am? But nobody dared. And when the child opened his eyes, Elisha summoned Gehazi, carried the child, and gave it to the woman. And what did the woman do? Overwhelmed. This woman bowed before him in gratitude, took her son in his arms, and brought him downstairs. Because faith prevails when all else fails. When that hope that we are holding on to just seems to be fading away. When that very thing, what is it? A good job? A good family? When we question and ask, Lord, why is that woman sick? When she is so faithful to you, when she loves the Lord so much, and yet she falls sick with no treatment in view. Why are there little babies and little children who fall ill to cancer? Why, Lord? When we have more questions than answers, when our hope just seems to fade away, when all things that we are hanging on to that seems to be true, when we start questioning God, Lord, bakit? This is what we do. Hang on, because the Lord, who is the object of your faith, is the one who will prevail. There is a happy ending. That is His assurance. Maybe not in the here and now, but surely in the end, in the future, in the end when He welcomes us to heaven, in the end when He will be opening His arms and telling us, good and faithful servant. Our happy ending is there. There is a happy ending. Because with God, there is a happily ever after. Our faith should prevail even when all else fail. I don't know what you're going through. I don't know the cries of your heart. I remember my mom. My mom died of cancer. And on her deathbed, she was already very thin. she was rarely speaking. There are times that she would speak, there are times that she wouldn't. But always, every night, or every time that she would sleep, she would always utter this psalm. Psalm 4 verse 8, where she says, every time I lay my head to sleep, I know, dear Lord, you are the one who are watching over me. That was the faith that she was hanging on to. That even at that point of death, even at that point of weakness, she knew in her heart that the Lord was there watching over her. Ganon din po tayo. As the song a while said, our God reigns. Why? Because He is immovable. He is in control. He is steadfast. And there is nothing that will separate us from Him. That is His promise. His promise is that He will always be with us, no matter what our condition is. Because faith prevails even when all else fails.